Streaming now from the National Association of Black Journalists and the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, an interview with 2020 Democratic presidential candidate and former Vice President Joe Biden.
Everybody knows who Donald Trump is. We have to let them know who we are, what we stand for.
I'm so proud to endorse Joe Biden for President of the United States.
He's the candidate that meets this moment.
Racial justice is on the ballot in 2020, and Joe Biden is on the ballot in 2020.
On the interview panel, two-time author and Mexico border correspondent for the Dallas Morning News, Alfredo Corchado, Washington correspondent for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Tia Mitchell, former foreign correspondent and host of NPR's Weekend Edition, Lulu Garcia-Navarro, and CBS News national correspondent, Errol Barnett.
Mr. Vice President, thank you so much for joining us today. I am going to jump right in.
Okay.
Because there is, of course, a question on everybody's mind. I'm sure you know what it is. Have you selected your vice president, and who is she?
Well, since this is embargoed to Thursday, I'm not going to tell you.
Do you know who she is yet? I mean, there are 11 names circulating. There has been some criticism within your party that the process has been messy. It's been drawn out. How many women are on the short list exactly?
Well, first of all, if they think it's been drawn out, they've not watched any other vice presidential picks in history. This is, in fact, ahead of time. As a matter of fact, and notice most vice presidential nominees aren't announced until a day, 2 or 3 before the convention. And so I've gone through it. It's been very orderly. Every one of the women we've interviewed is qualified, and I've narrowed it down, and I'll be ready to make that announcement. You'll find out shortly. You'll find out shortly.
Just want to follow up to you on that point, Mr. President. You've been,
Sure.
Mr. Vice President, you've been through this experience before, the vetting process, the speculation. But someone on your own VP selection committee, former Senator Chris Dodd, reportedly has been critical of some in contention, like Senator Kamala Harris, for not being more conciliatory since she went toe-to-toe with you during the debates. He says that's a reason she should be disqualified. Is that fair?
No, but he didn't say that to the press. He was talking to somebody offline, and it was repeated. Now, I don't hold grudges, and I made it really clear that I don't hold grudges. I think it was a debate. It's as simple as that, and she's very much in contention.
Now, on day one of your presidency, if we listen to the scientists and the doctors, as you say you will do, you're likely to begin your presidency in the middle of this ongoing pandemic. So how likely is a rollback on day one of the reopenings of businesses that we've seen nationwide?
Well, look, that's a good question, but an unfair question, because I have no idea what this president's going to leave me with. If he acts responsibly, which he hasn't done thus far, if he acts responsibly, I may be in a position where we don't have to roll back. But if he continues to walk away, wave the white flag, and just say open, and then listen to some quacks telling him that what we should be doing, and you can, mask cause COVID-19, the whole thing is he's got to be more responsible. So it depends on what I inherit to determine what I'll be able to do and say and should be saying on the day I sworn in, if that in fact happens.
So based on what you see now, would you roll back the reopenings?
I'm not going to speculate on that because I don't know
based on what it's going to be.
What I see now, I think we are. If I were president today, I would roll back the reopenings in a number of places because look, it's clear, mask and social distancing make a gigantic difference in terms of the spread of this disease. It's simple, it's factual, it's real. And everyone, wherever there is a significant percentage of people with COVID, should be required to keep social distancing and mask. Bars should not be open. There should not be congregations of more than 10 people. We should have circumstances where, in fact, they react responsibly, including in places of work where people where they're able to go in and continue to work in terms of social distancing, testing, and the like. He's done none of that. None of that is part of what he is suggesting. I've laid out in detail what I would do, and all the way back in January when this first came out. Then I did again in March, talked about how I would invoke the Defense Act to require significant stockpiling of PPE. I would also have made sure that we wouldn't have fired the overseers of the folks who determine the allocation of the money that the Congress has allocated, so that the inspector generals know where the money's going. I have laid out in detail what I thought he should be doing with regard to the OSHA and the standards are required for businesses to open. I've laid it all out, and he's followed none of it.
Mr. Vice President, how often are you being briefed on the pandemic, and who's in charge of keeping you up to date on what's going on?
4 times a week, an hour a day. I just went through an 87-page memo with my team, including Vivek Murthy, who you know, and other docs, former heads of the CDC, that are part of an entire team that I have, that we put together and go through it at least 4 times a week. And I spend an hour and a half today on the telephone. I mean, on what we're doing right now on camera.
So based on what you've heard, you know, a lot of people are concerned about schools. Do you think children should be in schools in person while we're waiting on a vaccine to be developed?
The answer is it depends. Look, I want our schools to open. The question is, will the president do the work and needs to make them safe? Just ordering schools to open like Trump has done isn't going to be good enough. I've laid out a roadmap to reopen schools safely and effectively. First, get the cases down in the communities through social distancing, masking, testing, tracing, and PPE. Second, give school districts uniform guidance without political interference on effectively and safely the safety protocols, including ventilation, physical changes in classrooms. And third, give those districts the resources to implement the guidance. Studies show that we need $34 billion to make schools safe nationwide. For schools that can't reopen safely, help them improve their virtual learning. Start working now to get close the learning gap in terms of distance learning because of COVID. President Trump should stop tweeting and start doing his work.
What's key to people feeling safe to go back to work and school is a vaccine. And a recent CBS News YouGov poll found that some 70% of Americans would either wait to get a vaccine and see what happens to other people or not get one at all. That's a huge segment of the population. So how then would you secure that every American gets a vaccine as soon as possible, considering that distrust?
Tell the truth. Listen to the science. Lay out explicitly whatever vaccine comes first. Make it totally open for review by every medical facility in the country, making clear that, in fact, it is safe instead of what Trump is talking about. He's talking about all these different vaccines. They're going to be ready to go and so on and so forth. It's the same thing much earlier, I laid out what would constitute a business being able to reopen. And when I talked about it, I said we should have a circumstance where they were able to meet all the criteria that are recommended by the CDC and others and be able to put on a sticker on their window saying, like a good housekeeping seal, you can come in here because we test, we distance, we do all the like. And so the practice is that the way he talks about the vaccine is not particularly rational. He's talking about it being ready. He's going to talk about moving it quicker than the scientists think it should be moved. And so it matters to let the people know that it is all transparent, exactly what the facts are. Let the medical community writ large speak to it so that there's transparency. That's the only time. Look, I think people are going to, as the poll showed, and we talked about it today with the 2 docs and my staff, that in fact people don't believe that he's telling the truth. Therefore, they're not at all certain they're going to take the vaccine. And one more thing, if and when the vaccine comes, and it's not likely to go through all the tests that needs to be and the trials that are needed to be done. And the question is he going to seek emergency move? Well, I think it's really important right now I proposed a $25 billion plan for the distribution to guarantee that every single American has access to the vaccine. Because what's going to happen, you know as well as I do. If the vaccine came out tomorrow, how in the heck would we get it to people? There is no game plan they have. How would everybody in America have access to it? It is a gigantic problem to distribute, even if we have it. And that's what we should be planning for now, not when we get it.
Mr. Vice President, I'd like to ask you about healthcare, because obviously this pandemic has exposed many weaknesses in healthcare. In your platform, you'd extend medical benefits to DACA recipients, but what about the workers who have no protection, specifically farm workers now deemed essential to make Americans sure that they have food on their table? Should undocumented immigrants also be able to get subsidized healthcare?
If they are working in the United States of America and they are paying taxes, they should have access to health care. They should have access to what everybody else has access to.
This most is important every undocumented worker?
No, it depends. Not all undocumented workers are working. You say on every undocumented worker. Every person in the country, whether they're undocumented or documented, should have access to a vaccine if and when it occurs, should have access to testing and treatment and hospitalization if it relates to the virus. And that should occur, period. It's in the interest of everyone that everyone be taken care of, and everyone should be able to be eligible for that.
So just to clarify, you were saying that if you are undocumented, you would be able to get a vaccine for free, subsidized?
Yes.
I'd also like to ask you this. This pandemic has exposed, as I've mentioned, so many weaknesses in the healthcare system. The most vulnerable, often Black and brown communities, have been handling much of the financial burden. Before the pandemic, you were against comprehensive single-payer system. Now, if Medicare for All came across your desk as the pandemic has hit so hard, would you veto it?
It's not going to come across my desk, but look, the pandemic has not only torn through our nation, devastating families and wrecking economies, it's exacerbated some of the worst inequities. I'm going to fight for health equities, but you don't need, the quickest way to get that is for Black and Latino Americans to have access to the Obamacare with a public option. That's the quickest way we can get everybody covered.
But hasn't this pandemic and the tsunami of layoffs shown the limits of private health care that is tied to employment?
No, it hasn't, in my view. There's countries that have, in fact, single-payer systems that hadn't helped them very much either. The question is, what do we do about rallying the pandemic and treating those who are affected by it? Everyone who's affected by the pandemic is access to free care for anything having to do with that pandemic.
Now, some of your most ambitious legislative goals, Mr. Vice President, are likely to face, fierce Republican resistance. In fact, President Obama, during his eulogy for civil rights icon John Lewis, said the way to fully restore the Voting Rights Act is to abolish the Senate filibuster. Do you agree?
I don't think we have to. We're going to be able to do that anyway. Look, we're going to elect at least 5 to 6 Democratic senators. The Democrats are going to control. That still won't
get you enough of a supermajority. To veto.
That's your judgment. That's your judgment. I'm pretty good at this. I've done that pretty well my whole career in the United States Senate. Got a lot done. And here's the deal. The deal is that with President Trump gone, and the fear of retribution and his how can I say it, his ego of following and ruining any Republican who disagrees with him, that's gone. That's gone, number one. Number two, you're going to see a lot of Republicans, at least a half a dozen of them, beginning to vote their conscience because they no longer have the fear of Trump being there. And thirdly, if we gain control of the United States Senate, which I believe we will in the House, you're going to find people willing to take a vote that, in fact, that was controversial before, because this time it will pass. There's no sense in making it. The reason why, the way human nature works, and you all work the same way, if you're going to have to go against the grain of the folks you hang out with in order to vote for something that is not going to pass anyway, you're not going to take the shot. But if you're hanging out with a group of people and it's against the grain, but you know it's going to pass with your vote, then that's a very different thing. And so I just don't believe that you're going to have this kind of resistance before that we had before. And by the way, everybody said we didn't get anything done. After President was elected, after Trump was elected, before he was sworn in, I put together a coalition of Democrats and Republicans to provide for over $9 billion to NIH and almost $2 billion for cancer research. We only had something like 100 votes for it in the House, and we only had something like 36 in the Senate. It passed in January. It passed in late December, before he was sworn in. 398 votes in the Senate and over 96 votes 96 votes in the Senate, over 398 votes in the House. Everybody,
so just to be
can't
clear,
get things done. We'll get
you do not agree with President Obama that getting rid of the filibuster is necessary. He described it as a relic of Jim Crow.
What I said was that if, in fact, they are as obstreperous as is expected, we'd have to get rid of the filibuster. But the filibuster has also saved a lot of bad things from happening, too.
So you're open.
Oh, yeah. No. I'm sorry. I thought I'm on record as saying that if the Republicans, if there's no way to move other than getting rid of the filibuster, that's what we'll do.
I'll jump in, Mr. Vice President, and ask,
sure.
As we're talking about elections, the pandemic, as you know, is keeping a lot of people at home, and there's a lot of interest in voting by mail. But there has been, a lot of comments from President Trump and other Republicans casting doubt on the security of the election system. What should states be doing now to ensure voter confidence in the election?
What many of them are doing. Voter suppression is what he's trying to make a big deal out of it. There's nothing we're more focused on because, frankly, this is the thing that keeps me up most nights. Making sure everyone who wants to vote gets to vote, making sure that everyone's vote is counted. And we're going to undertake a historic effort in terms of resources, commitment to beat back every voter suppression effort and to make sure that the voters know every legal option available to them. Our campaign has a strong, effective voter protection and anti-voter suppression program. Voter protection campaigns we're putting together for November meet the unique requirements and challenges that we're facing from this president. No campaign has ever built anything to the scale that we've built to make sure we can get out the vote. We have a major dedicated operation in states to address the head-on voter suppression in any form that's going to take, and steps we can take to go to court as well. But look, think about this. Did you ever think you'd live in a country where you had a president of the United States saying, let's postpone an election? People see through this. You have 5 mail-in state voting places. 2 of them overwhelmingly Republicans. Republicans support mail-in voting. Republicans. We saw what COVID has done to elections during the primaries. And we know there are voter suppression problems that have nothing to do with COVID. So we're going to be prepared to make sure people have an opportunity to be protected when they show up in person to vote. And we're going to have to work with election officials in key cities and battleground states to increase the number of early voting locations. And in one recent case, almost double the number of people who showed up to vote. In states where the law permits, we're going to be requiring voters, providing voters, absentee ballot request forms, prepaid postage, and the like. So we're trying to raise money to be able to do that. The House, when they passed the CARES Act, they provided $400 million for to help voters, help states improve their voting systems. What's the president doing? He's talking about defunding the post office, for God's sake. What more do you need? Yes.
I'm sitting in El Paso, Texas, and it's been 1 year since a gunman walked into a Walmart and killed 23 people. He told police he came to kill Mexicans. This is the largest attack on Latinos in modern history. You've accused President Trump of bearing responsibility for the rise in hate crimes. How do you convince white supremacists that minority groups are vital to restoring the soul of America?
I don't convince white supremacists. They're not going to be convinced. They have to be put in jail when they do things that are inappropriate. White supremacists are not going to be convinced, but the vast, vast, vast majority of people are not white supremacists. Look, here's the deal. You know, I've been involved in civil rights my whole life. And one of the things I thought was that I thought we could really defeat hate. I thought there was a way to defeat it. And when I got out of law school, I came back. My city was in flames. My city was the only city, Wilmington, Delaware, occupied by the National Guard for 10 months, unlike since the Civil War. It just hadn't happened since then. And so what happened? What happened was I came back, had a good job, decided to leave and become a public defender. And I used to interview my clients down by the railroad station. And here I was 40 years ago, later to the month, standing on that same railroad station, waiting for a black man to come and pick me up to take me to Washington, D.C., to be sworn in as president and vice president of the United States. So I called my 3 children up. My son was the Attorney General of the state of Delaware. My other son was the head of the World Food Program USA. And my daughter's a social worker dealing with criminal justice. And so I said, don't tell me things can't change. Look. And I looked over the east side and I said that was all barren and burned to the ground. Now it's moving and so on. And so I thought you could defeat hate. The reason I'm running is because of Donald Trump's what he said when those folks came out of the fields in Charlottesville. I realized hate doesn't go away, it just hides. And when a president breathes oxygen under the rocks, he pulls them out, he legitimizes them. They make up a significant minority of the American public, but left unattended, they grow, and they cause great damage. And that's why we have to make sure we do a whole range of things. But there's a lot of things we're going to do because, look, for the first time, you have over 70% of the American people concluding that Black Lives Matter, the phrase Black Lives Matter. You have almost as many whites marching with blacks to say, let's end this systemic racism in America. I think the country's ready. They're ready because they know we can make significant progress, and they know the reason why they've been safe from COVID is because of the Latino and black communities have been doing all the hard work. You got thousands of DACA students out there doing the mainline work and making sure that people are safe. You have all kinds of folks, the woman making sure she's stacking the grocery shelves to make sure we have food to eat. The farm worker you talked about, ma'am, who is making sure we have the food to get in the table. They figured it out. And we have a confluence of 3 things that have happened that are going to give us an enormous opportunity to change the dynamic in America. 1, the COVID pandemic. 2, the gigantic unemployment. 3, the systemic racism that is so exposed. We can now move in a direction. That's why I put this Build Back Better plan together, focusing the last piece on racial equity. We can do this. The country's ready. They know we must.
Mr. Vice President, I want to follow up on your point to Alfredo's question that white supremacists can't be convinced. You just said there that the extreme right-wing folks in the country left unattended will grow. So shouldn't there be some sentiment to reach out to people who hold racist views to convince them otherwise?
That's different than the white. Look, you're talking about white supremacists. I thought you're talking about the people like the kid who showed up in El Paso and gunned down all those innocent people. Okay? That's what we're talking about. The Ku Klux Klan and the like, the white supremacists, those who belong to those groups. They are a minority. I'm reaching out to everyone else. I've done it my whole career. My state is the 8th largest black population in the United States of America as a percent of population. That's where I started. That's my support. That's what I've been working with my whole career. And you can deal with those who in fact are prejudiced. A lot of prejudice out there, but not everyone's a white supremacist like the kid who went in and gunned down those folks in El Paso. There's a difference.
Now, you've apologized for your role in the 1994 crime bill that created the 3 strikes law, expanded the list of crimes punishable by death. So what will you do now to make up for what you have described as the pain brought by that bill that many people still feel today?
Well, let's get something straight. the bill at the time it was passed was overwhelmingly passed with every major black mayor in America. The Black Caucus supported it. And violent crime against African Americans fell by 57%. It had things in it that I did not like at all, like 3 strikes and you're out, which I argued against. It also had some very good things in it. Assault weapons ban, drug courts. It made sure that we were in a position where we were going to focus on dealing with rehabilitation. 1/3 of it went to prevention, 1/3 to rehabilitation. All of those things, they in fact made sense. On balance, the whole bill, there were only 2 provisions in it, 3 provisions that were really bad. One was 3 strikes and you're out, and 2 was a mandatory and only employed twice. And 2, the idea that carjacking was a mandatory minimum penalty if you were convicted of it. And 3, money for state prisons, which all 3 of which I opposed. But on balance, it was a much, much, much better bill. And so now we face a different problem. We have too many people in prison. That's why President Obama and I reduced the federal population by 38,000. Of all the people in prison today, 93% are behind a bar in a state prison, a county jail, and or a city jail. And so we passed the Fair Sentencing Act to reduce sentences related to crack cocaine. I'm running on a plan to reform the criminal justice system so we can fix it. It should be a rehabilitation system. No one should go to jail for a drug offense, for example, which I've argued for a long time. They should go to mandatory treatment. We automatically wipe out anyone's record for using marijuana. Once people get out of the system, all their rights should be restored, including the Pell Grants and voting rights and access to housing. We also have to expand the power of the Justice Department to address systemic misconduct by police departments and prosecutors and establish an independent task force on prosecutorial discretion. That's what I've been pushing, and I've been pushing it for now a long time. We're going to get that passed.
The city of Asheville, North Carolina, recently approved what they call reparations to their African American community in the form of home ownership, affordable housing, and access to capital for businesses. My question for you is, do you think the American government owes Black people reparations? In what form, if so, should it take?
I think the studies suggested by my friend Cory Booker should be followed through and see. In the meantime, we can't wait. If you take a look at my Build Back Better plan, which you probably haven't had a chance to read, it does all the things that Asheville just did. It provides for a down payment, first-time down payment of $15,000 for Black Americans and Hispanic Americans seeking housing. It invests significantly more money in public housing and how we used to call public housing, subsidized rental. Nobody should be paying more than 30% of their income for dealing with for rent. It fundamentally alters access to capital across the board for small businesses. They're the vast majority. We have already 400,000 Black small businesses have gone out of business. That should not be happening. They should be at the front of the line. I propose that we take the program Barack and I put together that said that there's $1.5 billion that brought $3 billion off the sidelines for entrepreneurs, Black entrepreneurs. And we're going to change that to 300.
If I may, you rolled out a plan this week for Latinos. My first question is, what took you so long to come up with a plan for the largest minority group in the country? And this plan talks a lot about urgent actions. What's at the top of that list?
Well, first of all, everything in that plan I've already said over the last year and a half. We just packaged it together so everybody knew what it was. And so it was in one place, number one. The most urgent thing is to fix first of all, every executive order this president has issued relating to the border and relating to dealing with the Hispanic community is going to be pulled back. We're not going to be fooling with that. First thing I'm going to do, and I've already written, send to the United States Congress a path to citizenship for 11 million undocumented folks. DACA is going to be preserved. period. And they're going to be put on a path to citizenship. We're going to invest in economic mobility, invest in wealth inside Latino communities, especially Latino businesses, and ensuring Latinos have access to credit and capital by providing Latino businesses access to participate in federal contracts and critical assistance programs, ensuring economic relief reaches Latino businesses. That's what my whole plan about manufacturing in the United States and dealing with all the public money being spent under the control of the president. That is one that will, in fact, be available. Those contracts and that chain, that supply chain for manufacturing, is owned by many small business people, Latinos as well as African Americans and other minorities. We're going to expand access to. I'm going to finish this answer. We're going to, and the last piece is we're going to tackle the inequities in education. That's why I'm tripling the money for Title I schools, providing university and pre-kindergarten, all across the board. We're going to make sure that the funding gap is existent. We're going to expand STEM curricula. We're going to deal with underserved schools. And we're going to make sure that anyone who comes from a family making less than $125,000 has free access to 4 years of public education, college. There's a lot more. So anyway.
Thank you for that. I have a few questions that I'd just like to get through because they are incredibly important to the Latino community. First of all, you are extending TPS, temporary protected status, to Venezuelans. Cubans, though, are now being deported in unprecedented numbers. Would you stop those deportations?
What I said, I'm going to look at entire temporary. I'm going to look at every single country in the world that, in fact, is being, and this guy's sending them back. The reason why I came up with Venezuelans, he's not even allowing it to exist in the first place. And so the TPS program is something I will move on the first day I'm in office to make sure that we extend it to people. We look for too long, we didn't get it right. But here's the deal. I think that we should be extending it. Anybody can prove that they are in jeopardy to go back to their country, and the reason they came in the first place, they should be able to stay in the United States of America until the circumstance changes in their country. And that's why, by the way, I put that program together to provide. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. Are you going to re-engage with Cuba, though? I mean, I'm specifically wondering about, the Florida communities that are, incredibly interested in the Cuba issue, and see status given to Venezuelans while Cubans are being deported.
The answer is yes. I'm going to engage. Yes. And by the way, what you all know, but most people don't know, unlike the African-American community, with notable exceptions, the Latino community is an incredibly diverse community with incredibly different attitudes about different things. You go to Florida, you find a very different attitude about immigration in certain places than you do when you're in Arizona. So it's a very diverse community.
Sir, President Obama was known as the deporter-in-chief, removing more than 3 million people during the Biden-Obama administration. Trump campaigned on Build That Wall. I did. No, the Obama-Biden administration. Trump campaigned on Build That Wall. Are you willing to tear that wall down?
No, there will not be another foot of wall constructed in my administration, number one. Number two, what I'm going to focus on, the fact is that somebody in this group written a lot about the border. I'm going to make sure that we have border protection, but it's going to be based on making sure that we use high-tech capacity to deal with it. And at the ports of entry, that's where all the bad stuff is happening.
What about the land confiscations?
Stop, done, over, not going to do it. Withdraw the lawsuits. We're out. We're not going to confiscate the land.
Mr. Vice President, under the Trump administration, asylum has virtually ended. ICE detention centers are practically empty. Your new plan calls for reversing President Trump's harsh plan. But won't that restart a brand new border crisis? I mean, what would you do with all those people in camps now waiting in Mexico?
It will if we don't do it well. If we don't reach out to the communities that are willing to the charitable communities that will come in and help. And in addition to us spending millions of dollars providing for access for judges, access for asylum folks to be on the border, to move quickly. Because if we just say, okay, all done, I've withdrawn the order, you're going to have a crisis on the other side of the border as well. And we shouldn't be putting these people, when they come across the border, in jail. We should be monitoring them. There's ways to monitor without putting them in jail, number one. But we have to make sure that we build up the infrastructure to be able to accommodate Trump's cruel and inhumane border policies, ripping children from their mother's arms, and Trump's migrant protection protocols, remain in Mexico program. I mean, all of this is going to take time. Not a long time, but it's going to take, you have to be prepared so we don't create another crisis, as you pointed out.
And what do you do?
And so,
sorry, but what do you do with the Department of Homeland Security? How do you hold it accountable?
You hold it accountable by being president and acting accountable. I will have someone heading that department that listens to what we say. It's outrageous what's being done now. And by the way, ICE is going to go back to school. The idea that ICE is sitting outside of a mass on Sunday to arrest a parent coming out is undocumented. The idea that they're going to schools, the idea they're going to doctor's appointments is wrong. This is about families. And you have so many young children under enormous pressure and psychological pressure, wondering whether or not they're going to come home and there's going to be no one there. We need to do so much more. There's a way. This is all, from my perspective, it's all about families. We have to push humanitarian resources to make sure that we have public-private partnerships to support people living in these conditions. We got to surge resources to the asylum protectors. There's so much we can do, but guess what? It's going to cost a lot of money, and I've been calling for it for a year and a half.
Are those asylum seekers that are on the other side of the border now in camps going to be allowed to come and do their claims inside the United States? Something that has not been afforded to them?
There's got to be an orderly process for that to occur, as your colleague said. Otherwise, if I just say tomorrow everybody comes across the border, this is the first time ever you've had to seek asylum in a third country. It's outrageous. It's wrong.
Now, Mr. Vice President, your opponent in this election, President Trump, has made your mental state a campaign topic. And when asked in June if you'd been tested for cognitive decline, you've responded that you're constantly tested in effect because you're in situations like this on the campaign trail. But please clarify specifically, have you taken a cognitive test?
No, I haven't taken a test. Why the hell would I take a test? Come on, man. That's like saying before you got in this program, if you take a test where you're taking cocaine or not, what do you think, huh? Are you a junkie?
What do you say to President Trump, who brags about his test and makes your mental state an issue for voters?
Well, if he can't figure out the difference between an elephant and a lion, I don't know what the hell he's talking about. Did you watch that? Look, come on, man. I know you're trying to goad me, but I mean, I'm so forward looking to have an opportunity to sit with the president or stand with the president in debates. There can be plenty of time. And by the way, as I joke with him, I shouldn't say it. I'm going to say something I probably shouldn't say. Anyway, I am very willing to let the American public judge my physical and mental as well as my mental fitness. And to make a judgment about who I am and what state of affairs I have, what kind of physical shape I'm in, what kind of mental shape I'm in.
Someone who is on your VP shortlist, Senator Kamala Harris, told NPR last year that the Justice Department would have, quote, no choice but to prosecute Trump after his presidency. Should you win? Would you follow through on the many investigations? Could you envision him, a former president, being prosecuted if the evidence shows wrongdoing?
Look, the Justice Department is not the president's private law firm. The Attorney General is not the president's private lawyer. I will not interfere with the Justice Department's judgment of whether or not they think they should pursue the prosecution of anyone that they think has violated the law. But I also
including a former president.
It depends on what happens. It depends on what happens. I think it is a very, very unusual thing, and probably not very, how can I say it, good for democracy to be talking about prosecuting former presidents.
Well, what has to happen? You say depending on what happens. What has to happen? What is the bar for you?
I'm sorry, depending on, I don't know what some of these cases going on in the New York courts are. I don't know the detail of those cases. And so if there's a case underway that in fact has to be pursued, and they believe it should be pursued, and the Attorney General thinks it is, that's a very different thing. But in terms of saying, I think the president violated the law, I think the president did this, therefore go and prosecute him, I will not do that.
But if it shows that there was wrongdoing, you believe that a president could actually be prosecuted?
I don't think anyone's above the law. And you're not. And I love the way you're trying to get me into this thing about lock him up. I'm not going there.
Well, there are, there are right now a number of investigations. I mean, the Southern District of New York just said that there are extensive and protracted criminal conduct at the Trump Organization that they're looking into. This isn't speculative. This is something that's actually happening.
I said those things that are underway, if they prove to be a criminal offense, then in fact, that would be up to the Attorney General to decide whether he or she wanted to proceed with it. I am not going to make that individual judgment. He's not my lawyer, or she's not my lawyer.
Mr. Vice President.
Go on.
Mr. Vice President, I want to go back to voting rights.
Sure.
You talked a lot earlier about that you think there are some states that are engaging in voter suppression. And my question is, if you were to become president, is there anything you've considered taking executive action in order to shore up voting systems or protect voting rights for American public without waiting for congressional approval or a bill to pass?
Well, the answer is I do what Barack and I did in our administration. The Attorney General would go after, there are somewhere about 84 or 85 attempts that have been made, and I think it's 31 states, don't hold me the exact number, to suppress voting, to make it harder to vote. And I would take those systems and I challenge in court those attempts, those new attempts at Jim Crow. I would do that. I would have the Attorney General go out and make sure that we have, and the first thing I'm going to do in terms of the Justice Department, I was the guy who got the Voting Rights Act and extended for 25 years. And along came the Shelby case in Shelby County in Alabama, and the court came along and said there's no longer a requirement that you have to get pre-clearance because of the conduct in the past. So any change you wish to make in the electoral process, you have to check through the courts. They said that is old, but they can't do that. But we're allowed to change. There's no constitutional prohibition to change the provision in the law. I think it's Section 4, I'm not positive, to change that provision to say they require pre-clearance under certain conditions. That requires a vote in the United States Congress. That is now the Lewis Amendment to the Voting Rights Act. And that's what I push very hard. And I've been pushing it for a long time.
We just want to get in just one question in the international sphere. President Trump is not the first president to say China is ripping off the United States. President Obama made similar complaints. Some have said Trump's stance is a good one to counter China's influence. Would you keep the tariffs?
No. Hey, look, who said Trump's idea is a good one? Who said Trump's idea is a good one?
Some feel that.
2 or 3 people. Manufacturing has gone in recession. Agriculture lost billions of dollars that taxpayers had to pay. We're going after China in the wrong way. China is stealing intellectual property. China is conditioning being able to do business in China and based on whether or not you have 51% Chinese ownership. That's got to end. I've spent a fair amount of time when I was vice president with President Xi because the president wanted me to get to know him. He's no Democrat with a small d at all. But here's the deal. I made it real clear.
So if you scrap those tariffs, what do you want in return? Or are you just going to scrap them without any concessions?
No, here's the deal. The question is, what is the appropriate behavior that they have to engage in international trade with us? And they have to play by the international rules. And what we have done is we have disarmed ourselves. We make up 25% of the world's economy, but we poked our finger in the eye of all of our allies out there. The way China will respond is when we gather the rest of the world that, in fact, believes in open trade and making sure that we're in a position that the world that we deal with WHO the right way. That in fact, that's when things begin to change. That's when China's behavior is going to change. And for example, when I was last there, he said to me, that, they set up an air identification zone, that they had in international airspace that said that you had to check with China before you could fly through it. I said, we're not going to pay attention. He said, what do you want me to do? Take it down? I said, you should, but we're not going to pay attention. So we flew a B-1 bomber through it. We've got to make it clear the international rules of the road in terms of airspace, sea space, and the way in which you deal with the trade and equity that have to be imposed. And what we did in our administration, when they started dumping steel, we responded. They just overproduced, and they just started dumping steel through the state-owned entities. We responded, and it stopped. They also did the same thing with tires. And so you respond under the rules, the international rules of trade, and hold them to it. That's what you do.
And just as we run out of time here, Mr. Vice President, how would you confront China on the alleged human rights abuses, not just toward Hong Kong, but toward Uyghur Muslims as well, beyond these newly announced Senate sanctions?
You may recall I was the first one to say we should act and go to the United Nations with the Uyghurs. I believe the first one, period. We should be in the United Nations condemning China's action. Their concentration camps. They're concentration camps. And look what happened when he didn't respond to what was going on in Hong Kong. It emboldened China just to go ahead and break what had been an agreement they had made about the quasi-independence of Hong Kong. Now it's done. And so now we're taking action relative to Hong Kong. But look, folks, you have to speak up. He's walked away. He has no conception of human rights. The way he's embraced dictators and thugs around the world, the way he's failed to take on Putin in terms of what's going on in Afghanistan, what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on in Eastern Europe, what's going on. Look, this is a man who's embraced all the wrong people, and he treats NATO like it's a protection racket. So I just think that we got to say, China, these are the international rules of the road. You play by them or we're not playing. Period. Now, what we most have to do, is invest in our own people. We used to invest nationally about 2 to 3% of our GDP in technology as a government. It's now down to 0.3, if I'm not mistaken. Could be 0.4%. What are we doing? What in God's name are we doing? They're going to own the 5G market. They're making sure they're focusing extensively on IT. And we are doing what? What are we doing? Trump continues to focus on all those industries that are obsolete in America. We should be investing in made in America and make sure that our workers can outcompete anybody in the world. Anybody in the world. But what are we doing? They're not being trained. We're not focused on it. I'm sorry. So you had a question. I know we have to go, and I have another event, but fire away.
I wanted to thank you for your time, Mr. Vice President, and wondering if you have any closing remarks for the membership of NABJ, NAHJ, people who are watching this interview right now.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank, especially want to thank President Tucker and Hugo, as he's referred to, the president, for the leadership and inviting me to join you today. Look, and I want to thank you for all the work you do by strengthening diversity in our press, strengthening quality and capacity of the press, and is broadening our perspective and, deepening our connection with each other. And we need that more now than ever. And we need people who know about it. especially at a time when Black and Latino reporters have been targeted by this president for asking questions, honest questions, and condemned for standing strong and for doing their job. Look, America's facing a confluence of crises and immeasurable pain, but we're also facing an incredible opportunity. It's an opportunity to right a wrong that has festered since our founding fathers. The fact is, Black and Latino Americans have never been fully included in our democracy or our economy. And it's a moral failure that seeps into everything. I've said it already. In the course of this pandemic, Black and Latinos Americans have been 3 times as likely to get infected and twice as likely to die. Black and Latino Americans are disproportionately out of work, facing evictions, losing hope. The communities are the first ones to get hit and the last ones to get any relief. We need an overwhelming response to right that wrong. And I'm proud of the sweeping plan I put together to build back better, including everyone in the deal. You know, it's long past time we deal with systemic racism in America and deliver Black and Latino Americans their full share of the American dream. Every one of us has a role to play in that work. So I want to thank you for shining a light on all of this and the work you do and the stories you communicate, because you have great credibility in the people you communicate to. It matters a great deal. And folks, I know you may not agree, but I, honest to God, think we've been delivered to one of those inflection points in American history that hasn't occurred since the 30s, where the public has had the blinders taken off and they've looked around and said, oh my God, I didn't realize it. I didn't realize exactly what was going on here. And you began to see it happening. I am convinced, and I'm also emboldened by the younger generation, the Generation Z to the young millennials. They're the best educated, the least prejudiced, the most open generation in American history. I think we're ready. Look, I'll just say one last thing. When you have roughly 24 out of every 100 students in kindergarten through high school that speak Spanish, how in God's name does it make any sense for any other American to say there's nothing we should do more than make sure they're fully integrated, educated, and grow? They are the future. It's the future of the country. It's real. It's not a joke. It's real. And the idea we walk away makes no sense. And by the way, I make these talks and speeches when we were able to get out to the chambers of commerce, to Republicans. I say, tell me how you don't benefit when African Americans are better educated and have access to education, housing, and businesses. How are you not better off when Latino small businessmen and women profligate throughout the country? How are you not better off when they're better educated? People are beginning to figure it out. And so I think we've been delivered this terrible time in our history, but it's given us a great, great opportunity. I really, honest to God, believe the combination of COVID, the economic collapse, the situation we have with regard to racism in this country, and it's been exposed by George Floyd and others what happened, and everybody now realizing science matters and they're beginning to focus on the environment. We can provide millions of good paying jobs, grow the economy. Even though I'm supposedly the liberal progressive guy, you got Wall Street people saying, hey man, this can grow the economy. We can generate economic growth and once again lead the world. But we have to stop. You know, we've always led the world, as I said, not by the example of our power, but the power of our example. And it's missing. We're being devastated all around the world. We can change that. I know how to do that. That's what I've done my whole life. Thank you for taking the time and listening.
Well, Mr. Vice President, we appreciate you having this conversation on behalf of voters, on behalf of myself, Tia Mitchell, Lulu Garcia-Navarro, Alfredo Corchado, and everyone gathered here today. Thank you very much for your time.
I hope you'll have me back, for real. I'm happy to, okay?
Open invite.
Thank you.
You got it.